And this is where I challenge you to imagine, what are your curiosities? And they're only unique to you. No one can give you a curiosity. It's something only you can find. Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a great day. You know, I want to acknowledge you for showing up, listening to this podcast, and being open to just thinking a little bit differently about happiness, about really what the purpose is for us on this singular life that we live here on this planet. What is it? Why does happiness sometimes elude us? And what is happiness? You know, there's so many debates right now about happiness, pressure to be happy, pressure to be joyful. And then also this feeling of thinking that everybody else is experiencing happiness and I'm not. What's wrong with me? There's also an enormous upswing in anxiety and depression in our world right now. It's the highest cause for death in America that's just superseded fatalities from car accidents. Believe it or not, this is on an upswing for us in our world right now. And so being brave enough to listen to alternatives, being brave enough to look at this from a different light, I applaud you. I honor you. And I thank you for listening to this podcast. And I welcome you to always join us over on the Business of Happiness Hive. It's a private Facebook group where we continue this conversation and really support one another in an even bigger way. So check us out over there, and welcome to all of our new members who have joined us over there. Today, what we're touching on is one aspect of how to stimulate happiness in your life. And, you know, I came across this at a time in my own life when I just felt like, really, is this all there is? I don't know if you can relate to this. Can you ever remember a time in your life where you felt like, wow, is this all there is? I get up, I do the same thing every day, I go through the same routine, I face the same challenges, my kids are the same way, my husband's the same way, my job's the same way, and really, is this all there is to life? It's not even really an idea of boredom, it's just questioning, is this it? It's the first kickoff question to what is the meaning of all of this? Have you ever felt like you wished you had more drive, more motivation? Maybe there was something you wanted to do or create or achieve, and you just couldn't find that drive, that motivation. You're just constantly looking for external sources of motivation. You know, it works for a while when we hang a carrot for ourselves. We give ourselves a reward at the end of the journey, and that works for a while, but man, there's a reason why every New Year's resolution only lasts so long, right? Because that reward is sometimes not big enough. And sometimes the fear of the alternative is not big enough, because that can be a motivator too, right? When we feel like we are being chased by a dragon, and man, you'll run faster than you've ever run if there's something fearful chasing you. Or maybe you just feel like you want to find your passion. Everyone's talking about living a passion-filled life. I mean, I'm talking about that. What a glorious way to live. I'm not interested in living a ho-hum life. I'm interested in living a phenomenal, spectacular, passionate life, right? And sometimes that's intimidating. What does that mean? How do you even find your passion? Follow your passion, everyone says. You know, don't just do your day job. Follow your passions. But that can seem overwhelming. So maybe you've just been thinking, man, how do I even figure out what my passion is? So today we're talking about the very first spark of how to access those intrinsic motivators, how to access an insight into what your personal passion is. And it's a very simple tool that we've all had within us since we were tiny. It's something I see in my 3-year-old niece. I see her every day exhibiting this talent, and that is curiosity. Curiosity. Curiosity has been the initiator of every single thing that you have ever accomplished. It's been the first spark of how you learned to do anything. And dare I say, the seed of happiness and fulfillment. All right, how is that possible? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what curiosity even is when we're talking about personal development. Well, it happens to be a powerful intrinsic motivator. We talked about extrinsic motivators. Those are the things like money, sex, food, alcohol, vacations, wealth. Those kinds of things are extrinsic motivators. So if I do this, I get that. If I diet long enough, I'll have a good body. Ego-based external motivation. And sometimes it works really well. It's why many people go to work every day, because they'll get money. Not because they care about what they do. Many people just show up to work so that they can get money. What is the external motivator to get up and get out of bed every morning? But once again, those things only last so long. They have a finite ability to motivate you. So curiosity is one of those intrinsic motivators. And it's one we forget about. And as we get older, we feel silly incorporating it. We think that it's not important. And it's such a critical part of our own happiness. And it happens to be an extremely powerful intrinsic motivator. Stephen Kotler talks about this in his new book called The Art of Impossible. And he dives deep into the neurobiology and the neurochemicals and the neuropsychology of how curiosity works. But the basic principle behind curiosity is it actually stimulates dopamine and norepinephrine, these feel-good neurochemicals that make us really happy in the moment. So when you stimulate curiosity, when you can find curiosity, it actually makes you feel good. And those feel-good hormones create that feedback loop for you. So when you think about something that you're curious about, you feel a little bit good, and then it creates this kind of feedback loop that you want to engage in on a more frequent basis. So that's one of the reasons why curiosity is such an important factor in happiness and in motivation. It's also a profound focusing mechanism. When we get curious, we start honing in on something. We start deleting and ignoring the external stimuli that are interrupting us or distracting us. So when you become curious about something, you dive right in. Haven't you noticed that when you reflect on your life where maybe there was something that you were really curious about, and so you really dove into it full tilt? That's what graduate programs do. When I was going into dentistry, man, I could ignore everything to a fault. I mean, I ignored my laundry and my dishes and my own health, but I was so fascinated by what I was studying that I was able to really focus very intensely. Even people with ADHD or people with anxiety disorders who say they have a hard time focusing, they can find something that they focus really well on. And what that nugget tends to be is something they're very curious about. In fact, they can be extremely focused as well. It's one of the flip superpowers from the Achilles heel that they're carrying with them, is that they can focus very intently and delete all that external stimuli. The other person who talks about curiosity in such a powerful way is Elizabeth Gilbert. She's an author who I absolutely love and adore, and I've spoken about several times on this podcast. You might know her from writing Eat, Pray, Love, but one of my favorite books of hers is Big Magic. And in it, she writes, "Curiosity is the secret. Curiosity is the truth and the way of creative living." And that's most certainly true. We know that about curiosity. None of the creations in our world would have happened without somebody's questioning and curiousness about it, right? We wouldn't have any of the inventions or revolutions of society if somebody didn't sit down and say, wow, I'm really curious if this could be different. I wonder how this could be different. I want to understand it more deeply. I want to know how I could alter this or change this or be a part of this. Curiosity sparks creativity. She was talking about it also in regards to writer's block, right? And so many, many creatives who feel like they need to constantly be putting something forward feel this panic of writer's block. And so one of her antidotes to writer's block is curiosity. And actually, that brings me to the third thing I wanted to say about curiosity, and that is that curiosity is actually an antidote to fear. So we can think of writer's block as fearful. Maybe you're afraid of how people will perceive your writing, or you're afraid your content is not good enough, or you're afraid that you're going on a tangent that's not applicable to what you're writing about. Whatever those fears are that are creating the writer's block, it's curiosity that can pull you out of it. And haven't you noticed that yourself in your own life? When you may have been scared or nervous about something, curiosity can put you back into the driver's seat. I'll take an example from my own life. There have been times where maybe I've felt not great about my own body, or I haven't been able to focus on my health and my nutrition and my exercise in a good way. That's happened to me recently, actually, with this move. We've been moving our family, and we're staying in a temporary place, and it's just impossible for me to be on top of my exercise and on top of my nutrition as I was when I didn't have this extra commute and living in limbo. So the fear that sneaks up, the anxiety that sneaks up, is I start feeling negative about myself and my body image. But what can catch me and pull me out of those negative words, that negative language that I'm swimming around inside my head that I've trained myself for 40 odd years to do, what can pull me out of it is a moment of curiosity. Well, let me be curious about this. Even if it's intrigue into how I can alter my routine. Is there some form of nutrition that's easy to eat on the road for me and my family? Is there something I can do in terms of exercise that takes less time during the day? Or is there, when I start thinking about being curious about it, I'm curious about, can you stay healthy and fit if you're doing this type of exercise as opposed to another? Is there something that I could be drinking or eating that, all these questions, just being curious, and suddenly I feel less fearful, less anxiety. Just by asking myself those questions, I start to feel a little calmer. The other thing that's phenomenal about curiosity is love itself is born out of curiosity. That feeling of connection with another human being, even a connection with yourself. And long-term relationships, many relationship experts will tell you this as well. Long-term relationships maintain their spark when you maintain your curiosity about somebody else. 100% this has been true in my life with my husband as well. When we started to get into that rut where we just have certain expectations of each other, and I think I know him really well, and I know how he's going to respond, and I'm almost expecting a response from him or a way of carrying out his day, then my connection with him falters a little bit. But when we stay curious about one another, when we can ask each other stimulating questions, when we give each other the benefit of the doubt that, hey, maybe he doesn't react that way anymore, or maybe he's changed his mind, or maybe he has a different perspective and I've just been projecting this perspective on him all this time. When we can ask each other questions and truly remain curious about each other, our insight, our perspective on the world, our newest and most recent interests, now we're tapping into that love that we have for each other again. And didn't love even start with curiosity? When you were interested in someone, if you're in a committed relationship, remember what it was that brought the two of you together. It was curiosity, right? It was curiosity that sparked that excitement and that passion for one another. Curiosity also satisfies our human need for pattern recognition. There's a reason why Sudoku and word puzzles and crossword puzzles and puzzles themselves are so fulfilling, why they feel so good. Because every time we find a pattern, we get a hit of dopamine. Every time. And dopamine is that feel-good drug. In fact, I think even if I'm correct about this, we might even get some serotonin in there too. And when we get those flush of feel-good hormones, then we like to do it again. And isn't it funny? Sometimes I've done a Sudoku puzzle and I get so into, and at the end of it, I just have a completed Sudoku puzzle, right? There's not a lot of external reward at the end. You've just done a Sudoku puzzle and that's it. There's no other reward. But man, it felt so good in the moment, right? And that's all it is. It's those the moments of feedback neurochemicals that feel really good, but it's that pattern recognition that we satisfied. So when we think about curiosity as pattern recognition, now we tap into the next step that Steven Kotler talks about, and that is how to make curiosity a passion, how to find passion from curiosity, because that is the next step. And the way that he describes passion is this intersection of multiple curiosities. And he talks about if you can find an intersection of 3 or more curiosities. There's a great practice that he suggests, and this is a cool activity if you're interested in trying it. But he talks about just listing 25 curiosities. So if you're interested in trying to find your passion, sit down with a pen and paper, start listing 25 curiosities. And the key here, as usual, is being very specific. So a curiosity wouldn't just be food, but maybe a curiosity would be the nutritional values of foods, or foods that are good for anti-inflammation, or how to feed my family well with healthy foods for them. Something that's more specific to food. And list all those 25. And what he warns in his book is the first 10 are going to come very easy, and the next 15 are going to be a challenge, but it's a good practice because it gets you to think a little bit more outside the box and to stimulate those neurochemicals a little bit more and to try to be even more specific. And so patience is what he suggests. Just be kind to yourself, be patient, and know that they will get more and more challenging, but really to sit down and force yourself to do 25. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you didn't get into business to be miserable. The problem is that people feel that if their business gets busier, if they start becoming more successful, that happiness will eventually set in. But it can actually get worse. This is why I created the Business of Happiness Prosperity Coaching. In this one-on-one coaching, we look at how to redefine success on your terms and re-find the joy and the passion in your dream. Visit me at thebizofhappiness.com and become the happiest business owner you know. And then this next step is hunt for the intersections. This is putting into play that excitement about pattern recognition. So start seeing where your different curiosities meld and how can we put them together. Something that I saw him write about in another article before he finished this book, he was talking about an example of being fascinated by the protein content in grasshoppers, using grasshoppers as an alternative source of protein in our diet. But he also has a passion for extreme sports. That's how Steven Kotler came about writing about doing the impossible. He was really studying these athletes who were doing phenomenal feats that human beings were never supposed to be able to accomplish. You know, how did we break the 4-minute mile when that was supposed to be something that humans couldn't do? Or how did we surf a 100-foot wave when we were only supposed to surf 30-feet waves? And it was very clear at one point in science that human beings couldn't accomplish this. Well, he was studying athletes who were accomplishing these feats that were quote unquote impossible. And he was looking at how do these extreme, incredible human beings do these impossible things. And this is what he found. It starts with curiosity. It starts with curiosity and then finding the intersection in these curiosities. So going back to his example of the protein in grasshoppers, well, his other curiosity and his excitement was about these athletes, right? He loved studying and learning about elite athletes. So where the intersection might be between those two curiosities in this exercise might be, how can we use grasshoppers and the protein in grasshoppers as a nutritional source for elite athletes? See how we can find the intersection there? And maybe another curiosity is curious about, I don't know, saving the planet, right? So maybe it could be the intersection of all three of those. How can we look at grasshoppers as a great source of protein, and maybe it's a smaller footprint in terms of the ecology of our planet. Maybe it's less destructive to our planet to resource bugs like grasshoppers instead of finding protein from animals. And how can that also be a great resource for elite athletes? See how our curiosities start to come together. And now we become hyper-focused. And the work becomes easy. This is when people say you should do what you love and you should love what you do. It's easy when we're curious about it. It's easy to run a mile when you're curious about how long it's going to take you, when you're curious about how far you can get. It's when you're curious about what it's going to feel like when you get to the end. But if you're just forcing yourself to do something, that feels forced. That's exactly what it feels like. It doesn't feel fun. It doesn't stimulate passion. It only instills fear and anxiety. One huge benefit of curiosity for me in business came about during the pandemic. You know, when everything was shut down, when we were told by our governor that we couldn't practice dentistry in the late spring of 2020, and we had to literally close our doors for months. That is terrifying. Never having done that before, it was terrifying. And many dentists and business owners were very afraid. What saved us was curiosity. We dove straight into, okay, how are we going to communicate with our patients during this time? What am I going to incorporate in terms of a weekly, daily habit to communicate with my team? How am I going to prepare for when we open up again? See how we suddenly dove into curiosity instead of swimming in the fear. In fact, when curiosity exists, it negates that fear. This was a powerful tool for me during the pandemic. You know, another interesting thing about curiosity is something that Stephen Kotler talks about, the passion recipe, in terms of how to build a purpose from your passions, from your curiosities. And it starts with that curiosity. The curiosity is the first step. And we talked about stacking curiosities, right? When you stack the curiosities, now it becomes a passion. You realize that you really love this category of fiction novels, and you really love this time period, and you really love strong female protagonists. Now it becomes a passion. We're curious about all those things, and now when we incorporate and we stack those curiosities, it becomes a passion. You pay more attention. And this takes time. Something that many people have cultivated over time, it looks like they did it overnight, or it's always been with them, but it's actually something that has taken time. Developing a new art form takes time, but time is less of a concern when you have that curiosity. In fact, curiosity can expand time. Can you think back to a time in your life where you were really curious about something and you were completely in the zone and time escaped you? We see this in our children, right? They sit outside of time. Time doesn't even exist when they're super curious about something. We can get annoyed and frustrated and try to pull them back to reality because they've stepped outside of time. And curiosity has allowed them to do this. And, I wager to say that as adults, we can tap into this resource again and find those moments of what Stephen Kotler calls flow and feeling great just for a few moments because we're staying so curious about something. So building on those curiosities to find your passion. And then the next step in his algorithm for finding purpose is attaching it to someone else. Curiosity can feel selfish, and it is selfish. It's all about you and what you love and what you're interested in. So when you can take that passion, those curiosities that you've stacked, and attach them to another human being, a purpose outside of yourself, now we're beginning to add even more value to your passion, and it takes on a whole different form of motivation. When now you can see that you're actually improving someone else's life or making a difference on this planet or saving animals, when you have a greater purpose and you can take all those curiosities and the passion that you've cultivated over time and now add it to something that is really helping someone outside of you, we're beginning to reach a purpose. And these purposes can be lifelong. See how what started out as a simple curiosity has not only blossomed into feeling good, right, with those neurochemicals that allow us to feel good. We're talking about pure science here, how to feel good scientifically, neurochemically, stimulating those neurochemicals that make us feel good simply by being curious, something that every single one of us has the capability of being. We found stacking them and finding the pattern recognition between our curiosities, we found some passion. And now we're finding greater purpose because we're including someone else in this journey. We're giving to someone else. That act of service has been shown over and over again to increase our own perception of happiness and purpose. So when you feel good, you can do good. It's what I say all the time. When you feel good, you do the selfish act of stimulating those neurochemicals. You do the selfish act of being curious so that you can spark your own creativity that's unique to you. And then you can bring in the rest of the world. And now the selfish act becomes selfless. Because it felt so easy when you were doing the things that you love, when you were curious about the things that you love. That felt easy. It didn't feel like work. Now we begin to understand when people say, do what you love and love what you do, because you're remaining curious about it. And now not only have we incorporated the initial neurochemicals of dopamine that felt so good and norepinephrine, that those chemicals that was stimulated when we were curious, now we're going to incorporate some of the pro-social neurochemicals that have been embedded in us since the beginning of time. These neurochemicals of serotonin and oxytocin and endorphins, those things that have kept us as social human beings, because now we're bringing what seemed selfish in the past, those initial curiosities, we're bringing them out to incorporate in a bigger and larger community. And the fourth step in Stephen Kotler's passion recipe is autonomy. And this is a big one. Autonomy is where you feel your own power, where you take back your own decision-making ability. Autonomy is the opposite of victimization. Autonomy is when you take the steering wheel and you make something of it. It's the freedom to pursue your purpose. And we pay more attention when we're driving the bus, right? Which means we're stimulating more of those neurochemicals. See how this is just building on itself. And not only are we flexing and strengthening those muscles of curiosity, but every time we climb this ladder of compounding curiosity, compounding passion, compounding feel-good chemicals in our bodies, now when we can drive the bus and lead this purpose this exciting passion that we're behind, now it feels even better. And things almost seem magical. Not just magical, but possible. possible for you? And then this last final black belt version of Stephen Kotler's recipe is mastery. And that, of course, takes time. No one became a master overnight. You know, when Laird Hamilton was asked how he surfed these 100-foot waves, and I might be saying that it's smaller than it really is. I think he might be up to 150. It's insane. But there was a time where we thought human beings could only surf 30-foot waves. It seemed impossible. And then in the 90s, everyone just started blowing these records away. And when we look at Laird Hamilton, we think, wow, he is just a superhuman. How can he do these things? When he was interviewed once, he was asked this question. And he said, you know, you didn't see me when I was 3 surfing a 3-foot wave. And then when I was 4, surfing a 4-foot wave. And, you know, last week I was surfing a 99-foot wave. So this is only 1 foot higher for me. It's interesting. We think people become masters and experts overnight, but we seem to forget that there has been a lifetime or even just decades of work slowly improving 1% a day. And so don't be intimidated by people who look like they're living their purpose and their passions. That took time. But what it started with is something we all can tap into. That's the exciting thing. That's why I love this topic so much, is because we all can understand curiosity. We've all been curious about something. Curious is something that we've had since we were tiny infants, and maybe along the way we thought it was childish. We stopped being curious. We thought there were more adult things to do in life. We thought there were bigger problems to face and that we didn't have time for curiosity anymore. And this is where I challenge you to imagine, what are your curiosities? And they're only unique to you. No one can give you a curiosity. It's something only you can find. And the way you find it is by tapping into how you feel about it. What are you curious about? And when I say tapping into how you feel about it, it's not so esoteric. It's not so spiritual as you think. It could simply be, when do the neurochemicals that flush your brain, when is dopamine hitting your brain? And what is it behind that dopamine that stimulated it? Because that's your curiosity. So we can look at it from a very different perspective, from a very science-based perspective. Or we can look at it from a place of true passion and love. What do you love? Right? What makes your heart sing? What makes your soul soar? Thinking about those things is what I love to do. And then how do you incorporate it into your business plan? How do you add those curiosities? How do you stack them to find your passion and set yourself on a trajectory of success that's boosted by these intrinsic motivators? I'm going to leave you with this great quote, once again, from Elizabeth Gilbert, because I think she summarizes what I was trying to get across here, and that is that passion can seem intimidatingly out of reach at times, right? It seems like other people have passions, and you can't even imagine how they got there. A distant tower of flame. And I love when she calls it a distant tower of flame, because that seems, so exciting. Flame, something on fire, something out of control, something raging. I love her description of a distant tower of flame, and distant in that maybe you don't have access to it. She says, accessible only to geniuses and those who are specially touched by God. And isn't that interesting? We think that of people who are famous or performing outrageous deeds, or extremely altruistic people who we think, oh, Oprah Winfrey, I could never be like her. She must be touched by God. We look at these people and we think of them as these distant, towering flames, unique and so outside of us. And then her second half of her quote follows, but by curiosity is milder, quieter, more welcoming, and more democratic as an entity, meaning it's accessible to all of us. I love that. And it's so wonderful to think about curiosity as being that first initial spark to be able to set you off on that trajectory to reach for that towering tower of flame. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on this episode. I love talking about passion and purpose and happiness and fulfillment in your life. And I get so excited to share this information with you. And when I find these great resources and these great insights, it's just my passion to be able to bring it to you. So I appreciate you for being out there and receiving it and for hearing it. And I really love the idea of tapping into those curiosities. So I challenge you now. What are those things that you're most curious about? Sit down, write them down. Can you come up with 25? It's a tall order. Can you come up with 25? And then where is the intersection in those curiosities? And just by doing that one activity, I promise you, you will add to your happiness in your day. Thank you again for joining me. I hope that this has been of value to you. And if it has, please share it with your friends. The more we can support others in this endeavor, this is your opportunity to bring that information to increase their happiness and increase yours and stimulate some of those pro-social neurochemicals. Until next time, today is going to be a great day. And remember, when you feel good, that's when you can do good. Bye-bye.